Hi there, students. Affinity. Affinity. A noun. An affinity for something. An affinity with something. Okay, I think an affinity firstly says that there is a close similarity between two things. There are various close affinities between the styles of each of these individual artists. So a close similarity too. There are a lot of affinities between a dog and a wolf. Close similarity too. And then the other meaning of affinity is a liking for something, but particularly because they have shared characteristics. So I definitely have an affinity for rain. I like rain. I feel happy with it. It's something that I'm used to. It's something that always was there when I was a kid. So I have an affinity for rain. And I would say an affinity for something, a natural attraction, a feeling of kinship, a special affinity with animals. She has a special affinity with horses. Our society has a cultural affinity for the car. So an affinity, a natural tendency to use something. So if you're watching my videos, I would say you have an affinity with languages. So a person could have an affinity for making money, for example. Affinity, a natural compatibility, one thing with another. So perhaps sage, onion, goes nicely with chicken, or pork goes well with pepper, for example. I think there's an affinity of pork and pepper. Now, a similarity between the two things. There is definitely an affinity between these two things, that they are similar. So in the sense of an attraction, an affinity of A for B, an affinity between two things. So affinity, a liking for, a sympathy for, or some sort of close relationship, a close similarity, some sort of attraction between them. Many people feel an affinity with whales, but I think this is because they are mammals, they're not fish. You could have an affinity card, something slightly different. This is a credit card that when you spend money, a small amount of it goes to your charity, because I guess you like that charity. So an affinity, a natural liking for something, an empathy, a special rapport. So she had a special affinity with animals, or a semantic affinity between two languages. So there is a lot of semantic affinity between English and French, or English and Latin. There's similarities, there's likeness. Now you can also have affinity in relationships. This is somebody who is a member of your wife's family. Affinity is talking about a relationship by marriage, not blood ties, but ties through marriage. So for example, there is an affinity between me and my wife's brother. Okay, we're linked not by blood, but affinity, relationship by marriage. And in chemistry, an affinity, if there's an affinity between two things, these things tend to attract. Yeah, they tend to combine together. So we use soap because there's clearly an affinity between soap and charged particles of dirt. So an affinity. I felt an affinity with him. They seemed so different, yet I could sense an affinity between them. We have a deep affinity formed through many years of friendship. We shared a great many affinities in interests and the ways that we looked at things. Venetians feel more affinity with the inhabitants of Corsica than with the people in Rome. So an affinity with. Okay, you develop an affinity with someone, an affinity for something, an affinity between things. I felt an affinity with him. There was an affinity between us. Yeah, I have an affinity for Victorian things. They felt an immediate affinity for each other. There is a semantic affinity between these two words. Yeah? They are close together. She discovered she had an affinity with the rabbits immediately. These are ideological affinities, not ethnic affinities. Okay, so affinity, it's a relationship by marriage or some sort of kinship. They are linked because of something common, an attraction or a liking for something, an affinity to something, an attractive force, something that's similar, a similarity, an affinity between the teller of the tale and the people listening, because there is a link between them. There is definitely an affinity between psychology and religion or ethics, for example. So an affinity, a natural liking for something, an inclination for something, a close similarity, an inherent likeness, a similarity in structure between animals, between plants, between languages, a relationship by marriage, an attraction, a chemical attraction, two things that attract. So affinity's got in lots of ways a rapport, a sympathy, kinship, closeness, relationship, connection, attraction, similarity. He has an affinity for fine food. There is close affinity between Italian and Spanish. I felt a great affinity with the people of the region. I have a natural affinity with numbers. She felt a strong affinity for him. The film doesn't have much affinity with the book. The poems that he wrote showed a lot of affinity with Samuel Coleridge Taylor. They share a special affinity. Okay, so affinity. I think I'm going to give it a 6 in formality. I think you could use it anywhere, but it's a touch on the formal side. And let's see, we've got Old French affinité, and it's talking that the two things are similar. They've got a similar idea. Ad, to, and finis, the border. So to the border, there's a border between them. So affinity.